Well, good morning and good afternoon. One of the sutras that we chant on Friday mornings, is setting in motion the wheel of Dharma, which is the first teaching that the Buddha gave after his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree.
Excuse me, Neti.
Yes.
Can you just adjust the screen a little bit? The top of your head is cut off.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe it'd be good if we all had the tops of our heads cut off. Not really. So I thought I would just chant the first paragraph and then go through parts of it. It's just kind of interesting to slowly go through parts of the sutras. So it goes like this. Setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma Sutta. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was living in the deer park at Isapatana near Varanasi. There he addressed the group of 5 monks. Monks, these 2 extremes ought not to be practiced by one who has gone forth from the worldly life. What are the 2? There is devotion to pursuing sense pleasures, which is degrading, common, the way of ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. And there is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy and unprofitable. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realized the middle way. And it continues, but I thought I'd just talk about those lines. So just even the first line, thus have I heard. This is often the beginning of sutras because one reason is because the monks would listen to the Buddha, memorize the teachings and then go and then share them with people. So they would start with, thus have I heard. This is what the Blessed One said. This is what the Buddha said. And then share the teachings. But I like to just sit with, thus have I heard. And just examine, what is it that I'm hearing? How am I hearing? Am I just hearing with my ears and my intellect? The kind of hearing that we do in Dharma talks and in studying the sutras is a little sort of different. It's kind of hearing with our whole body. It's not so much like the sound coming in through our ears and then interacting with our consciousness. It's more like the sound penetrating through our whole core, right through our body into our belly. Hearing it so that the teachings become our own. Hearing it so that it's not an idea that we have, but actually we're just enacting it. We're just being the teachings. That's the kind of hearing that we're doing. Sort of like hearing with our eyes, so that when our eyes see things, we're hearing the sutras. Or seeing with our ears. When we hear something, we see the sutras. And the sutras is just another way of saying the way things are. Thusness or suchness, which is what Tathagata, one of the names we use for the Buddha. That's what that means. The thus come one. So it's a type of hearing that we're cultivating, which is why we repeat the sutras over and over and over. It's nothing boring about hearing them over and over and over, because each time we hear them, we either hear a slightly different bit to what we heard before, or we sort of see the implications more thoroughly. Oh yeah, more thoroughly do we hear what these teachings are saying and what the implications they have for how we live our life. So it begins with, thus have I heard. Once the Blessed One, and we say Blessed One because these teachings are liberating teachings. We really take these teachings in. We're liberated from our self-concern, and then that frees us up to be of benefit in the world. It frees us up from identifying with our opinions and our troubles. So we call the Buddha the Blessed One. It's probably not the only one that taught these wonderful teachings, of course, but sometimes it's helpful just to have it sort of personified in one great being. And so we have the Buddha sitting in Zazen posture with a gentle, attentive expression. And this teaching he gave, he addressed to the 5 monks. And these were the 5 monks that he had been training with for a number of years in very strict ascetic practices. And they had, when the Buddha stopped engaging in those practices, the monks shunned him for a period of time, thinking that he had kind of become weak and had sort of given up and lost his discipline. But then, after his enlightenment, when they saw this sort of glowing energy coming from the Buddha, just from his pure joy of being 100% present in this world, they became receptive. And so this first teaching, he's addressing it to the 5 monks. And what he says is, "Monks, these 2 extremes ought not to be practiced by the one who has gone forth from the worldly life." So we're going to go into those 2 extremes. But first, I'd just like to go over this word worldly life, because it can sound a little bit as if the Buddha is criticizing ordinary everyday life. You know, we're all living ordinary everyday lives. But this is not the intention here. I kind of quite like the word unexamined. This is the way not to be practiced by one who has, the one who is living, this is the way, I'll get my double negatives right here. These 2 extremes ought not to be practiced by one who has gone forth from the unexamined life. So when we've left the unexamined life, I like that way of saying it rather than worldly life. And all of us, I'm sure, can remember before we interacted with practice or before we interacted with any kind of sort of wisdom tradition, you could say that we had sort of unexamined lives. I remember I had an unexamined life in a certain kind of way. I was, trying to make things work, have a successful life, have less suffering and more positive things, and wanting approval from others, maybe not loudly but subtly, definitely, and wanting to have security, and it never quite happening. Just can't quite achieve it, nearly achieve it, or achieve it for a little tiny while, and then troubles come in again, and it feels insecure again, or not satisfying enough again. And so making an effort again to get security again and get satisfaction again. So that, and that just constantly rolling over and over and over. That's what's called an unexamined life, or in this instance referred to here as a worldly life. So it's not criticizing people. It's totally understandable that if we don't interact with some kind of wisdom, or enough wisdom, we'll get caught up in this unexamined way of living, which is trying to make the physical world, the material world, literally satisfy all our needs by being secure and being satisfying. And it just never quite works. never. For some people, it really doesn't work. It's very obvious that it's not working, but for a lot of people, it's kind of almost nearly working. So when we see the word worldly, I think this is a better way. Or it's certainly better to think of it as an unexamined life than actually thinking it's bad to have just a life where you have a job or have a family, because there's nothing wrong with having a job and having a family. There's nothing wrong with those ordinary worldly things that we do, like washing the dishes or growing vegetables or paying a mortgage or paying rent. But it is a source of suffering to have an unexamined life, to think that those things can alleviate all our troubles. So the encouragement here is to lead an examined life. And one way to lead an examined life is not to get caught in extremes. So then the Buddha goes on, what are the two? There is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. So this is what the Buddha was doing early in his practice. It was part of the spiritual traditions in India at the time, and in other religious traditions in other countries and continents as well. There's traditions of sort of extreme self-denial, the kind of idea that there's a split between the body and the spirit, and that we have to take away as much of the body as possible to allow the spirit to be strong. You see this in other traditions. I remember as a child, I grew up in Catholic Church. There was the spiritual tradition of extreme practices in some of the nunneries, which I was kind of pretty inspired by. And then we're going to talk about the benefits of asceticism. There's definitely benefits. But here what we're not wanting to do is to think that there is something wrong with the body that has to be tamed in some kind of, as if the body is bad, that we have to tame this tainted body so that the spirit can be strong. This is I think the mistake that gets made, and that the Buddha is referring to here, that there's nothing wrong with the body. The body is this beautiful vehicle that allows for consciousness. Without the body, we wouldn't have consciousness. Without consciousness, we can't be being of benefit. So there's nothing wrong with the body. So we don't want to sort of engage in self-mortification, sort of this negative attitude to the body. We don't want to have a negative attitude. Disliking the body and needing to suppress the needs of the body, or even the pleasures of the body. But I do think there's ways to have very creative forms of self-limiting, and I've enjoyed myself engaging in chosen forms of creative self-limiting. So maybe I'll share just a few of them. And sometimes it's self-limiting by taking something away, like not doing things, and sometimes it's by adding a discipline that you do whether you like it or not. So some of the ones that I've done is deciding to immerse myself in a body of water every day, but it has to be natural, can't be like a bathtub. And that sometimes was challenging. I was travelling or something, I couldn't find a body of water, I had to go to some length to find something. It might be just a muddy ditch at the side of the road, that's all I had, so that's what it had to be. And I heard of someone doing this in Canberra not long ago, and they often immerse themselves in some of those ponds in the middle of the roundabouts. We've got some great big ones. There's one that's got beautiful lotus flowers growing all through it. So even if it's kind of not clean water, didn't matter. So I did that for a year, and I really enjoyed that practice. It was just interesting. I didn't have a special goal except just as an experiment to see, could I just have that kind of discipline to do that thing? Just set it up. And it was also, for me, it was a way of connecting my body with nature. So it was an expanding my self-definition to remind myself that I am more than just this particular body. I'm part of this whole world, including water. Another time I took just one photo frame a day using a film camera and cycling between an object, a reflection and a shadow, alternating each day, and did that for... I was going to do it for a year, but my camera broke after 300 days, so I did it for 300 days. An old, wind-on type camera. And so that was an interesting... So that's a couple of examples of adding things, like adding a discipline. You can just make them up. And again, we can make them up in a way that is connecting us with the world. So obviously that photo project too was a way of connecting with these teachings of form and emptiness. One day a form, a very obvious thing, an object, but then a shadow, then a reflection. And no using of a flash, that was the other thing, no using of a flash. So occasionally I'd go to bed and then wake up and think, oh my God, I haven't taken the photo. And I'd have to get up, but I couldn't use my flash. I'd have to go out, find a street light, find whichever one I was on, photo, shadow, reflection. So these are creative kind of things. Some more obvious ones that lots of different people have done is going without money for a year, for example. Quite difficult to do if you're not in an actual monastic setting, which often people do in monastic settings, go without money, don't touch money. But I have known some practitioners in our lineage, in Suzuki Roshi's Soto lineage, who have just, not living actually in a monastery or anything, giving up money for a year. So quite challenging to do that. I haven't done that, but I did go with not buying any groceries for a number of years. Can't remember how long, maybe it was 2.5, I think, and just receiving food for free, what people gave me and what I could get through different kind of charity services. There was one that would get food that was expired from the supermarkets in America, and so that felt good. It was actually expired food, so it was giving that food a bit more life rather than it going to landfill. Interesting. And for me, they weren't deprivations. They were very interesting experiments to watch my attachments, and then to go like, this is so interesting how much I'm wanting, peanut butter, but I can't have it right now, and just seeing that, and then being able to sort of laugh at myself, like, or someone would leave something for me on the doorstep, and I'd look at it and be like, oh, it's more silver beet. A Swiss chard, as it's called in America, like, that's good. Would have kind of liked bread. So we can engage in all sorts of creative ways of putting limits on ourselves. And part of the purpose of that, or the effect of that, is that we learn to be less attached to these things that ultimately aren't reliable. These things aren't reliable. The physical world isn't reliable. In terms of when we want it to do a particular thing for us, it's not reliable. And so giving up things gives us a real way of noticing, how do I cope when things aren't reliable? How do I cope when I can't have what I want? Because like in the sutra, it talks about not getting what we want. Oh no, I think that's in Trust in Mind. It talks about not getting what we want. But in this sutra, in the Four Noble Truths teaching, of course, the first teaching is that suffering is what happens when you have a physical body, and we suffer additionally to the normal physical suffering that's inevitable by wanting what we can't have or wishing we didn't have what we do have. That's kind of the source, basically, of our additional distress.
Yeah, the same sutra, not getting what you want is suffering.
That's in this one? Okay, I always mixed up which one it's in. Okay, good, so it's in this one. Not to get what one wants is suffering. Always makes me smile. I've had, as all of us, I've not gotten what I've wanted. In some very serious ways, I haven't gotten what I've wanted. So our practice is to learn to be on some kind of subtle, deep level, quite okay with that, not to somehow think that was unfair. I mean, it was unfair, but to be okay with it being unfair. And the Buddha says here that it's degrading. And that's a kind of a strong word to say it's degrading, common, the way of ordinary people. And the way to think of this common, the way of ordinary people, I think the same as with worldly, is to think of it as the unexamined. It is quite common for people to lead unexamined lives. So it's about the unexamined quality that's being referred to here. And when we don't examine things, you could say it's degrading, it degrades our joy, degrades our peace. There's less peace of mind. There's less joy. And we need peace of mind and joy to be of benefit. It's not that we just want peace and joy because it's nice. It is really nice to be peaceful and to be joyful, to be able to just appreciate the sound of birds, or to appreciate Vegemite on toast and a cup of tea in the morning. It's nice to appreciate those things, but it's not just for that. That's a side benefit. The reason we want to have peace and joy is so that we can see clearly and act clearly in the world, and not be preoccupied with our own troubles. That's the whole reason we want to have peace and joy. So when the Buddha says it's degrading our capacity to be at ease and joyful. It's unworthy and it's unprofitable. It's unprofitable because ultimately it doesn't work. Just self-mortification, disliking the body or disliking the physical world, the world of the senses, is unprofitable. Because we have a body and we have a physical world, and you can't make them go away no matter how much you practice extreme practices, which, the Buddha really took it to the absolute extreme, as all of us have read about and heard about, of barely eating any food. It was said he could put his finger at his stomach and feel his spine easily, like it was so thin, you could touch his spine through the skin. His organs were so thin from lack of food. And also, just on a practical level, if that were the only way to find some kind of inner peace, it would just be denied to the majority of people. Because if you're a mother raising your children, you can't barely be eating any food. You couldn't raise your children. And if you're a parent that's providing for your children, you wouldn't be able to do it if you were so thin. You'd have no energy. So it clearly couldn't possibly be the way to liberation. So let's just go through again, because there's a bit about pleasures that I need to... Oh yeah, it's where he says there is devotion to pursuing sense pleasures, which is degrading common the way of ordinary people. So both of these things are degrading in various ways. But this devotion to pursuing sense pleasures, which is the opposite, also is insecure and unstable. And we all know this. Pursuing sense pleasures, trying to get satisfaction just through consuming things, whether it's food or entertainment or status or power or money or any of those things. They always run out, you know. If you eat something that's really tasty, at a certain point it's no longer tasty, or you're going to get hungry again. And if you're entertaining yourself a lot, it eventually gets boring. Too much entertainment is often, I think, why people need to it escalates. You want a certain amount of entertainment, it starts to become unsatisfactory, so you need more intensity in the entertainment, which it then becomes unsatisfactory, and then more intensity. So it's this pursuing of sense pleasures that I think is the problem. It's in the pursuing ordinary sense pleasures that come simply, there's beautiful sense pleasures that come from having a body. It's kind of nice when it's cold and then you get all warm. You get in front of a heater, or you put on a jumper, or you put on socks. And it's so lovely. Or if it's hot, and then you turn on a fan, and you feel that cool air, or you jump into the river. But this sort of pursuing of sense pleasures is a kind of a problem. Just experiencing sense pleasures that just come from the fact that we have a body, they're fantastic, and we need those. They're very joyful just to have the ordinary sense pleasures of having a body, and we want to celebrate those. I think sometimes people think the Buddhism doesn't celebrate the simple pleasures of the body, but it does. And we do see that in some of the literature, things like chopping wood, carrying water, just hoeing in the fields, sort of the pleasure of that, the sound of water, the images of mountains, clouds floating by, blossoms on a branch, a lot of these images that we have in the Zen literature, celebrating the simple pleasures of life. So sitting on a cushion, just sitting on a cushion. It is, isn't it? When you've been practicing for a little while, and there's not too much pain in the body, it's so nice just to take this posture, put the hands in the mudra, straighten the spine, just sit there. It's a really lovely pleasure. So they're the kinds of pleasures that are really nourishing for us. But so really pursuing sense pleasures starts to become a problem. And then the last part is the Buddha says, avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realized the middle way. So this is this middle way. We've often talked about this. It can seem like it's just terribly obvious to avoid extremes. Don't go too far that way. Don't go too far that way. Just be in the middle. But it's very profound to keep navigating just down the middle, a kind of stable centre. One way that I think this manifests is when something happens that we think of as bad, rather than going like, oh my God, it is bad, we can go, well, it certainly appears bad, but we'll see what good may be able to come from it. And that's kind of keeping in the middle a little bit. And the same if something's really good, rather than getting really excited about how good it is. We go, yeah, it's good. We'll just see where that unfolds, see what comes from that. Just keeping this kind of, keeping a little bit in the center, a little bit. It's not sitting on the fence. It's not about not committing to things. It's just not gripping too much in any direction. Just keeping a kind of a compass. It's a stable sort of compass in the center, with this sense of being of benefit in the world. But even that, not like, I have to be of benefit in the world. It's not like that. Yeah. All right. Would anyone like to comment or ask a question? No? Nobody want to comment or ask a question? Yes, Russ?
I'd like to hear what Sarah says first, please.
Putting you on the spot there, Sarah.
Thank you for your talk, Neti. I guess I'm feeling really tired, so I don't think I have anything too valuable to say right now. But the last thing you said about it's really true. I mean, I used to think about like I want to go out into the world and I want to really make a difference and I want to, and then I volunteered with like a local women's shelter and did a lot of different volunteer work and stuff. And that's good, but I was also busy with other things. And I think it's nice to remember that just by mindfully drinking our tea, that's benefit. That is a benefit. And just doing things, mindfully and being basically being aware of what's happening and just doing what we do in a harmonious way that is a benefit. That's what benefits us and all beings. And I think, I don't know, I guess that's what came to mind when you were speaking about, we don't have to think we have to go out and be a benefit, that just doing our practice and really settling into the practice and letting it become our way of life is beneficial to all beings. Thank you.
Russ?
I really appreciated what Sarah had to say and would like to chime in on that kind of side of the equation, and particularly uplift, highlight, and support the idea that our simplest mindfully engaged activities and intentions actually have ripple effects far beyond what we are aware of in our ordinary human consciousness level. I know this because I have non-ordinary experiences these days. And so I get to see a tiny, tiny bit more than I could see before. And I also wanted to express my gratitude for these very simple, basic, fundamental teachings of our lineage, the middle path and not falling too far one way or the other, and such very, again, basic kinds of examples of the middle way and how it can be our true north, our north star of our compass in our life when we're trying to make decisions about what is skillful versus not skillful and so on. And I have sometimes difficulties remembering things. And so having just little reminders like this every week in your lectures is tremendously helpful to me in my life. So thank you very much.
Oh, Sarah.
I thought I would make one more quick comment that I really like I wrote some notes down about just remembering that we can't rely on I forgot what I wrote now, but like I like the practice of thinking about what is it right now that maybe I'm a little too reliant on, and maybe I could give it up for a while and see, you know, like what would happen just for the experiment of that. Like maybe instead of drinking coffee, I could switch to green tea, or maybe, although I don't know if I could do that, um but it's just that practice, because it is really true. Like I think unconsciously sometimes we're not aware of it, that there are so many things that we are relying on and thinking that they're reliable, and we're kind of, I feel like it's kind of like in being intoxicated by this sense of being able to rely on these things. And I feel like the more that we practice and the dharma really comes into us and we live it, the more we start to see this, and we're able to kind of let go of those things sort of gradual, over time. I think it takes a long time. But anyway, I like that. Thanks for reminding us about that, Neti. And it also inspiring and encouraging us to think about what those things might be in our lives right now.
Evgeny?
I just wanted to uh, um, like to say something about two extremes, like the way how we live our lives, or we go through the day. We go in one way to another a little bit. We go to self-mortification, or to pursuing the pleasures. And so we can just steer, and we just pull ourselves back, and then we go to another direction. And this is how we just navigate ourselves, like towards, like along the path. And our practice is just like kind of gauges these steer. So basically we kind of have a little bit more of those moments when we awake where we're going and we drop it and we go down. So it's it's great to have this kind of driver behind the wheel who is more and more conscious about the direction, but also like realize that it's pleasures, both pleasures and self-mortifications have its place. um, yeah, so good.
Yeah. So just briefly to summarize that, Evgeny was saying that we kind of steer a little bit this way into pleasures, and then back a little bit this way into self-mortification, a little bit in pleasures. It's like being on a path. So I kind of like the idea of there's a path, and it's not too narrow and perfect. It's a little bit fuzzy on the edges. Because we kind of go over here into the pleasures for a while, and then we get like, yeah, that is enough of that now. Come back, and then a little sort of hard on myself. I'm kind of not feeling a bit bleak. Let's just come back a bit now. Yeah, so it's Zazen helps us be observant. If I tipped a little bit, it's just starting to go a little too much this way. We're going just a little bit too much that way. So that's a nice image of a path that's kind of, you can see it's worn a little bit on either side as well. Because we go a little bit either side. We don't have to be like perfectly down this little tiny line. Yeah, a little bit of indulgence. A little bit too hard on myself. Back, forth, back, forth. Yeah. Yeah, Jamal.
I accept I very well might be wrong about this, but on what Sarah was saying, I've always felt a bit uncomfortable with that approach, with this idea that just kind of being focused on our own behaviours and our own observances, just drinking tea or whatever else is, that doesn't feel to me like a middle way. It feels to me like an extreme. You know, there is the opposite extreme of being too outwardly focused and thinking we have to go and save the world. But that also to me feels like an extreme to say thinking we have no obligation to the world. We have no obligation to social justice. We have no thing that we have to go out and do from our positions of privilege where we have enough. And I don't know exactly where the middle way is in that, but I have often observed a kind of approach, you know, by a lot of people who do practice Buddhism, that to kind of to almost go what I feel is too far into the internally focused approach to say, well, all I have to do is drink tea mindfully and that's enough. I think in a world that, you know, we can have theosophical debates about the realities of the world, but I think when we are part of a world that has the suffering of others and that has a broader kind of, you know, level of good that we could possibly do to help alleviate that suffering of others, I don't know that I agree that we have no obligation to that. Maybe not an extreme. We don't have to go off and, you know, pick up a gun and fight in Ukraine or anything else, but maybe we also can't just sit there and watch everything happen and just go, I don't have to do anything about this.
Yes, yes. So we can think about extremes, any different pairings. Like in this one, the pairing was extreme pleasure and extreme mortification. But you could also have the extreme of stillness and activity. And of too much stillness, like just peacefully drinking tea, would be one way, if there's no activity of doing volunteer work in the world. So we're just wanting to avoid both of those. And a beautiful example, though, of that balance is in reading the life of Thich Nhat Hanh when he was in Vietnam during the war. Sometimes he would get very depleted from the immense amount of work he was doing dealing with the suffering there. And Sister True Emptiness, one of his closest, probably the closest person to him throughout his whole life. They kind of worked together. There's stories of him being, you know, drained and depleted, and then she would talk about how beautiful it was to pick the lettuce leaves and look at the lettuce leaves, or the fragrance from the tea, and then that for him would be like, it would give him his nourishment again, give him his energy again. Yes, I shall just enjoy this cup of tea. I shall enjoy just this salad that's been made for me for my meal. And they would give him the strength to then go back out and rebuild a village that had been napalmed. So we just want to like have a balance all the time. So the sipping of the cup of tea and the witnessing of a tree's existence is really a beautiful thing to do. But if we just get caught in that, okay, now we've gone and hit an extreme again. So this is why it's actually a very subtle teaching, because there's all sorts of traps that humans generate for themselves. You know, there's all sorts of ones that we generate for ourselves. So kind of keep coming back to this teaching. This is why those first lines, thus have I heard, there's so much depth to them, because what are we hearing and how can we hear that we're always tilting towards being caring in this world, but not draining ourselves and not denying our own needs. Like it's there's no perfect path. Everyone has to find the path. And that's why I think the path should be a little bit wide, so that we can kind of find our way along it. Yeah. Mark?
I was just thinking last night I drifted off to sleep reading Norman Fisher telling me that that almost sort of sanctimonious spiritual sort of persona that people that Buddhists can slip into by mistake is is yet another example of
Yeah.
it's very easy to just think, oh, look at me, sitting there, I'm so spiritual, and you're not.
Yeah.
It's really just.
Yeah. Mark was just saying that he was listening to Norman Fisher last night talking about other traps we can kind of fall into, like thinking that we're so serene and spiritual, and then also subtly thinking, and you're not. So the traps are there. That's why the practice goes on forever, and they say that the Buddha still practices Zazen in the heavens, still working with the Koan Mu in the heavens. There's always, we always need to be practicing. All right, we better finish. Thank you everyone for this discussion. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.